Welcome to Ungagged Interviews. I'm here with Gerry Hassan, political commentator, writer and academic. And I think we might be discussing a few things that are going on with the current general election campaign. How are you doing, Gerry?
I'm doing very well today. How are you?
Oh, I'm feeling fine and dandy. Right, first thing, at the moment in Scotland, it's looking like a real tussle between Labour and SNP in lots of constituencies. And with the rise of the Lib Dems in polls, some of the pundits are suggesting that the Lib Dems might become the third party in Westminster. And if you're you know that if you're the third party, you get certain privileges in there, and asking sort of questions at PNQs and so on is one of them. And the SNP, I think, have used that quite well to highlight Scottish issues. If Lib Dems or maybe somebody else became the third party, how do you think Scottish issues would fare with three UK-based parties at the top?
I think what's happening, there's a longer picture to this politics as well as, specific stuff in this election. The rise of the SNP, the big bulge of the SNP we saw at Westminster after the Indie Rev, the 2015, 2017 and 2019 Westminster elections have at the same time overlapped with the Lib Dems getting a kicking after the Lib Dem Tory Cameron Clyde coalition, and so that was not all serendipity or all even accident. There's an element of happenstance there. In that there was something specific happened in Scotland, and then there was a UK-wide kicking of the Lib Dems, which played into the SNP becoming the third party. The SNP being the third party was always a bit of a historical anomaly, based on their own strength but Lib Dem weakness. And I think it's more than likely that, and I think it's nearly inevitable that Lib Dems become the third force because of tactical voting and so on, and they're even rising in the polls a bit, as you've alluded to. And that there's loads of issues for that for the SNP. One of the biggest ones, I mean, I'm not sure how much it impacts on Scottish issues, because the issue of how Scottish issues are covered in Westminster and all that. There are media issues in terms of media coverage and so on. But one of the biggest ones to the SNP is the SNP post-Sturgeon are really struggling in terms of resources and money, and the party's donations from members and other folk is kind of drying up. We know that from the Electoral Commission. And if you lose the status of third party and the amount of MPs you lose, they'll lose what's called the short money, which is money that goes to opposition MPs to resource them, to give some resource vis-a-vis standing up, scrutinising government. So I think there's that practically, but there's a wider sense of it, the SNP taking a bit of they've lost momentum, they've lost direction, strategy. There's a whole other set of stuff we could get into there. And the party's going to have to deal with that.
Mm. I don't have any data, but I feel there's been more coverage of Scottish issues in mainstream media this election than there has been previously. Would you agree with that? And why do you think this has happened? Is it just a spin-off of the Euros? Or could they be thinking that the vote in Scotland could really affect the balance of MPs in Westminster?
Yeah, wait. In terms of the Scottish coverage in UK media, there is quite a bit, right? And I think what we've got is that since 2014, there actually has been a lot of Scottish coverage. The 2015 election, the SNP tsunami was a huge UK story. And if you remember that election, the nature of the SNP surge was used by the Tories in England, Ed Miliband in Nicola Sturgeon's pocket, etc., to influence a bit of Tory voters, because Cameron then won a majority. People didn't think he was going to win because you were a majority. We had a European, a Brexit referendum, and Cameron just blew himself up. And I think it's possibly more maybe than what the last couple of elections, Scottish coverage. And one of that is through viewing it through the gaze of the rise of the Labour Party. The fact that we are in a different political era now in the UK. I mean, it's the end of a Tory era, obviously, but there's something happening in Scotland, which is a bit about the SNP being out of office so long, 17 years, and they've got a track record to answer to. They've got issues around party governance, to put it mildly. The fact that the SNP as a party has not been run as a happy ship, as a democracy, has taken its own members with them, and then the wider issues about independence. So you've got that going on, the rise of Labour. more competitive seats in Scotland. And then you've also got the debate, which is like one of the longest running debates that ever goes on about Scotland in like perhaps the last 40, 50 years. The extent of which Scotland matters at a UK election. Is Scotland this critical factor that can push Labour over the edge into a winning position, or does Scotland not matter, as some people say, because Scotland's only 57 out of 650 seats? And I think the reality is something in between in a way. Scotland does matter, but not in the way it's sometimes framed. There's only been 2 elections in post-war where the Scottish Labour seats were the ones that pushed Labour over the winning hurdle, and that's 1964 and February 1974. And those were both short parliaments, then Labour went on to win bigger majorities. But it is true, because this is the point the SNP don't want to get into, the difference between Labour winning 1 seat in Scotland, as they did last time, and let's say, just say winning 25, so they make 24 gains, that changes how Labour have to perform in England. That's 24 less seats Labour need to win in England. So to get to a Labour majority is aided number-wise, psychologically, even the notion of a mandate, if Labour can win a mandate across 3 nations, is different if they win Scotland.
The Reform Party's overtaken the Conservatives in one poll by YouGov at the moment. If this is not just a blip, why do you think UK voters are going for this right-wing rhetoric and going by mainstream media again, possibility of Farage becoming the leader of the opposition in Westminster after the Conservatives and Reform merge?
Yeah, I think the rise of Reform UK is one of the unsurprising surprises of this election. There's a way in which lots of us haven't understood. I mean, I know there's a lot of people who really don't like the academic Matt Goodwin because he's gone from being an analyst of UKIP and that to being a kind of apologist for what's called the revolt on the right. But in the last 20 years, with the rise of UKIP terrified the Tory, obviously UKIP being Nigel Farage mainly, terrified the Tory party, forcing Cameron, he didn't have to, into making the commitment to a European referendum, led to Brexit, where clearly Nigel Farage, whether he's the critical factor or not, he is a major player in that 52-48 vote to leave. And what's happened at the same time is there's a similar shift on the left, but maybe not of the same radicalisation. As centre-right conservatism all across the globe, I mean, Trump, the state of the German Christian Democrats, the state of the De Gaulle Republican right in France, as conservatism has lost its old traditional moorings, which are deference, authority, religion, etc., and a more virulent right has come forward, that has then played in and has a relationship with a very, very hard ultra-right, or in Farage's case, kind of populist right. And really, we know from lots of evidence that the Tory membership is a hugely unrepresentative bunch of people. They are, if you ask them, very, very pro-Farage. And what you've got going on is you've had these issues that have been toxified, weaponised over many years, but in recent times, you've got a Tory party that is grassroots sympathetic to that. You've got a mainstream media that, particularly print, basically frames things in a Farageist sense, and brought a large part of broadcast media, including people like the so-called liberal BBC, they take lots of their cues from that mainstream media. So like Daily Mail headlines are put up unqualified, unconditional, and we have a framing of debate about not just immigration, but breaking the rule of law, trashing international treaties, a pariah Britain. So it's kind of surprising we are where we are, and it's not too difficult to imagine, given there's one Reform candidate, his pro-Hitler remarks, to imagine, and people have written on this before, a very English kind of fascism emerging out of this. I don't think Farage is a fascist. I don't think Reform UK are fascist, but there is a normalisation of things we thought were once extreme. And so you've got lots of people going around saying, like, Enoch Powell was right. You've got the way the Daily Telegraph, which used to be, what have you thought of it? It was a stale, boring right-wing paper of the British establishment. I'm nearly swearing when I'm saying it. It's bloody bonkers as a paper. It's conspiracy theories. It's like racism. It's a Powellite agenda, and our country's been taken from us. And so when you get wee vox pops, I saw yesterday some woman somewhere saying Enoch Powell was right. As somebody said, I understand that in the sense of I don't like it, and I want to oppose it, and I want to persuade. But that comment comes from a whole other pile of people who we have to take on, and really, there's a huge ideological struggle here. And without going on forever here about the points, the sense of a very pale, hollowed out, defensive. I mean, obviously the Labour Party is not a left now, but sense of a centre left and liberal opinion that have really just been posted missing in this for the last 20, 30 years, allowing a right that has then become this rancid to take over. So I kind of guess, I always guessed Reform would pass the Tories in the opinion polls, but I think it's a bit like a reverse 1983 when Labour nearly didn't finish second from the threat of what was the Liberal SDP alliance. I still think there's enough of a Tory residual vote for them just to finish second, but politics are much more fluid now. Anything's possible, and it is one scenario that Tories finish third, and we will say hell mend them, but it will be a very difficult and different politics to deal with.
Yeah, complex situation. Right. Lastly, you on your social media recently promoted the Kirkcudbright Fringe, and as you live in that part of Scotland, you promote on the social media any kind of arts or music festivals that are going on down there. Firstly, how did the Kirkcudbright Fringe go, and how important do you think it is to have kind of art and book and music festivals in a rural area like where you are?
Well, I live in a small town in Dumfries Galway called Kirkcudbright. It's got a great reputation as an artist town. It's got this long, long lineage and history that's really impressive. And it's got this current, record tradition of doing lots of events and everything. So when I moved here, I've lived here a couple of years now. So last year we put on the first ever Kirkcudbright Fringe Festival. It was an attempt to be a wee bit more contemporary, to build on what we've done, a bit more diverse, and run lots of things from music, cinema, talks, performance to bit of politics as well. And so this year our festival's coming up. We're always going to be the first weekend of September because we're in between. We are small compared to this, obviously, but it's a deliberate placing in between just after Edinburgh International Fringe, or Edinburgh International Festival and Fringe, and just before Wigtown Book Festival. And so we've got a great, as I was finalising the programme, which I co-produced with Chris Walker, who runs a brilliant hotel here, the Selkirk Arms. We were just about to go to press with the programme when Rishi Sunak announced his election. So it just meant all the events that were political just changed their tone slightly. So instead of going John Curtis countdown to general election 2024, it went John Curtis explains general election 2024. And I was rather grateful. We just caught, we've been the other side.
Yeah.
Of that, we would have had a program like, I guess some places that are out of date. It's very important to. I mean, I used to run a lot of events. I ran 25 weekends in Ullapool in the Highlands. I think one of the things, it's one of the reasons I moved to Kirkcudbright, is things that happen outside the Central Belt really matter, and really it's about presenting a different version of Scotland. It's about getting people to come from the Central Belt to experience a different Scotland. And I think I was always very conscious of that narrow bandwidth version of Scotland that you see on mainstream broadcast media. And there's just something really interesting about this. You even more realise Scotland is bigger than you think it is. And also, we're talking about some of this earlier, but literally, geographically, as well as practically, the limits of how parties talk and think about Scotland. I mean, Dumfries and Galway is mostly missing from how people in that Central Belt political class media think of Scotland, because the Highlands have a certain iconography, and even the North East gets a wee bit of a show, and I'm a Dundonian, gets a wee bit of a show because of the oil debate and so on. And so it's really just trying to frame that, have a sense of hosting, do something that's for people here, and then for people that come here, and think about trying to do it in a way that's different from other festivals, like say, book festivals, doing things a bit more in depth, a bit more reflective, while also having, what's wrong with having a good time as well.
Mm. Right, that sounds fantastic. Right, well, thank you very much for your time today, and I'm sure we'll speak to you in the near future, maybe some post-election analysis.
Well, thanks for your time, Neil, and you look after yourself.
Right, will do. Cheers.